All right, welcome back to Content That Grows podcast. We're excited to get going again for 2023. So I'm sitting down today with Derek Flint, marketing manager of 10Speed, and we are going to dive into all things, AI and marketing. Obviously, you've seen a lot, I'm sure, if you've been on any social network in the last 3 months. Just a lot of folks talking about it and making all kinds of claims and predictions, and so I thought it'd be a good topic to just kind of jump in today and sort through a bunch of the aspects of it. So excited to get going with that. How's it going, Derek?
Good. It's good to be back on the podcast. I think it's kind of like remembering how to set up. Feels like it's
Totally.
been an age since we've recorded one of these, so I'm excited to get back into it. But yeah, let's jump in. So with all of the noise, I think like something we could all use is like a more even-tempered, realistic take on like what's your stance overall around the AI tools in the marketing industry and what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, I think one, in general, it definitely feels like a hype cycle right now. I think there's just like I said, you cannot go anywhere without hearing about this, and it feels a lot like when there's crypto and other various things that have happened sort of over the years in terms of marketing specific or just in the tech world. And not that means it's a bad thing or that there's not value, but I just think it's just kind of all the buzz right now, and so I think certainly that will begin to taper off a bit over time. So I think that's one aspect. It is just that point in time where there are a lot of possibilities and a lot to talk about. But beyond that, I think one thing that I've seen is that I think there are a lot of like marketers in particular, just it feels like they have such a bad reputation of taking something new and just like ruining it almost, like it's treat everything kind of like in the classic like easy button kind of thing. It's like when social really like social media marketing started becoming a thing, and then it was just like, great, this is another place that we can just like dump a ton of stuff and like market at people like crazy. And it's like, oh, okay, well, over time it became clear like, no, this requires engagement, this requires thought, like there's a lot more that goes into it. And then chatbots became a thing, and everyone's like, cool, I just have to dump a chatbot on my site and it'll solve all of my pipeline problems. And and then over time it became clear like, nope, like buyer journeys are complex, and there are a lot of nuances to these things. And so I think that feels very similar now. Like, there's lots of cheat codes and playbooks and all these things happening right now. And I think that we'll just kind of see that normalize again to be like, oh, okay, this is, there are a lot of good things, but it's not just, an easy button situation. And just in general, I think, I'm very optimistic. I think that it will bring a lot of efficiency gains, but I think it will also get normalized over time, as everyone has access to these efficiency gains that they can get from it. So it becomes less, maybe a bit more of an advantage early, but becomes less of an advantage over time. And just in general, I would anticipate that smaller teams, smaller companies will be able to take advantage of it a lot more than just bigger companies that have more rigid process or strict legal restrictions, things like that. So, but yeah, I mean, overall, I would say I'm very excited about it and very bullish on the long term. But right now, short term is, I don't think, a realistic picture of how it will continue.
Yeah, I really, the easy button thing always makes me very nervous because it's almost like a double whammy sometimes. Like, I already feel like we fight a certain amount of stigma about volume and velocity around content marketing being connected to SEO, because there are a lot of freelancers and kind of these like rough, quick operations within agencies they're really about volume of content.
Right.
And so you start to compare that narrative around AI, which should make that even faster and cheaper for that line of thinking. That always makes me nervous. I'm like, oh, now we're compounding like bad practice on bad practice. But as far as sentiment goes, I do think there's something to that mostly being prevalent on social media spaces. So like, if that's all you're listening to all day, then the hype machine is like real, and we're getting a million like, Chat GPT is the most powerful thing in the world, and 99% of people are using it wrong. Check out these slides. And you're like, oh.
Yeah.
I mean, makes you wince and cringe.
Yeah. Like, just, obviously, like, Twitter is super easy to mute, like, certain words. But, I mean, even just yesterday, I was, like, searching how can I do this on LinkedIn and TikTok. Because I would just, anything with GPT, Chat GPT, any of that kind of stuff, like, I'll just block it and mute it, whatever. It's just, it's so awful, and how much it's really building up, and then like what kills me is when people put Chat GPT. It's not even like the right acronym. It's like that's an immediate
GTP.
disqualifier that you are jumping on the bandwagon and you do not understand or have not even used this thing, But
right.
Yeah.
Good. I think that's a good segue into like, there are a number of these tools, and they're different than obviously ChatGPT's, one form of AI. But have you gotten to play with and kind of work and test a few of these AI tools?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the funny thing is that like ChatGPT is definitely very interesting and a unique take, and a lot of the stuff that you can do with it is incredibly impressive. And so I think it makes sense that sort of like launched the conversation for a lot of people. But the funny thing is like, we've been using AI tools in marketing for a while, how do you think that it cuts out the word and creates subtitles for your video, and all these like different tools? Like, there is AI being used, but now it's like really just sort of launched into the forefront. But and I've tested Jasper, Lex, Copy AI for a variety of things, like just sort of prompting, list outline type stuff, social content, add, like product marketing copy, like a lot of different things kind of tested from a few different angles. I worked extensively with ChatGPT, but I would say like probably at least 50-50 personal and like business, but like maybe even the majority being personal. I think that's just where it's actually been more interesting for me, and like the outputs and stuff. And then, like I said, Descript, Subtitle, like these tools that you upload the video and it transcribes and kind of adds all that stuff. So that's the majority of what I've used, and I think overall it's like they're pretty good. In some cases, like it spent just as long trying to write the proper prompt in a tool and then editing it to sound like me as it would have to just write a post for LinkedIn. So some of that stuff, I think it's a bit of a trade-off, or like the more sober-minded you can be about it, the more you realize like, I don't know how much efficiency is being gained in some of these situations. But What about you?
Yeah, I think similar. ChatGPT and Lex I've had some experience with. I liked the feeling of Lex. It felt less tell me the answer, just because it allows you to sort of use the like, I'm in a Google Doc and I'm writing, and every once in a while I just need like a little help or input. It kind of felt, I guess, based on the way I was using it, it felt more like a more advanced version of Grammarly or something that was kicking out what I might want to say. And then another interesting one, which I think gets into like a certain conversation around like, it was called Latte. And so you can put your, video file in. It could be your webinar or podcast, and then it essentially spits out cuts for you. So it was like 10 to 12 short video clips plus your social copy. And the whole thing is just obviously distribution and social media breakdowns. And it was okay. I thought it's trying to do the thing you want it to do. It just never really fully understood where a thought began and end. And I thought if I was like trying to envision what would this be like on social. And so you think about the cut and you're like, this would be interesting in the fact that you have no idea what's going on and you just kind of want to be like, what? Like, what? Okay, I'll listen to that. Like, I'm intrigued enough. I heard several of the correct words, but you wouldn't get a full thought or like a full value statement. But the social copy was pretty terrible because it's not very good at like idea understanding, right? Because so many of these things are attempting to predict off a language model what to say next or how to like basically regurgitate what was said in the thing in different words. So I don't think it never led with like the punchline, here's the value, here's, why you should listen to this clip. It was more of like, here's what this clip is, and the cut was wrong already, so you were just kind of doubly frustrated. So again, you see the potential, but you're just left with like, I still can't use this.
Right.
And,
and I think that is the crux of it for me. Is I think it comes down to your standards, because long before any AI tools, like anyone can technically write a book, and I can probably find a ghostwriter on Upwork for whatever, $2, $3, $5,000. I don't know, maybe less, that would ghostwrite an entire book for me. But like, would it meet the standards of something that I would want to put out under my own name? Almost certainly not. And would it rival something from like a best-selling author? Almost certainly not, unless it was just some fluke. But it's like, it comes down to the standards, and I obviously shared before, I spent a long time at Sprout Social, and I think that there were a lot of standards that were held there, visually in terms of creative design, but also I think there was a good amount of pushback from Justin, the CEO, where we did try to do things more scrappy, faster, and the term that just sort of still kind of sticks in my head is like brand diminishing. And the point was like, why spend this long to do something and the result is brand diminishing when we can go X amount longer and create something that's actually like truly, brand building and like a positive asset in the overall marketing. And so I think, that mindset is certainly ingrained in me at this point, that like, it really comes down to it. Sure, if you're 19-year-old and you're like hustling and no one knows you and you have no personal brand, you're not behind a big company, sure, like you probably could have lower standards and crank out a lot of stuff and like really, really leverage something. But when you're marching towards 50 million, 100 million revenue SaaS company or anything like that, I think the standards are different, and in what's acceptable and how much you can actually leverage it, it makes a big difference. So I agree. I think that's a really big distinction, is kind of like what you would accept as good enough to actually use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's already hard enough to like decide what that standard is. We all know there's a certain level of a volume play within marketing, but deciding what that is now with AI is more complicated.
Yep.
So then if we take this back down to content marketing, if you were leading a content team, in some ways you absolutely are, what would you want to make your team aware of, or talk about or warn them about if they were interested in using these tools?
Yeah, so I think there's three things um, initially that come to mind anyway. Um, One is, just the reminder that like this is not citing sources. This is a model that's learned, over millions and millions of inputs, and so it's kind of just that like combination or like amalgamation of a lot of information. And so if it's something that you don't know as well, like you don't have a way to verify the credibility, like literally it's sort of the exact opposite of what the EAT framework is for Google, is like the expertise, well now experience, expertise, authority, trust, like you have no reference of that to know how credible this information is. And so I think that can be challenging. And second, in sort of similar to that, is you have to check against plagiarism because you don't know exactly where this came from and if it was, truly a unique output that was learned from the model, or if it was like, pulled and barely changed from something else. And then most importantly, is that like when you prompt an AI in any way, like any of these tools, any implicit bias that you put into the prompt is going to return biased results. And so an example for someone would be like, why shouldn't, marketing teams do X? It's going to come back with, all the reasons it doesn't work versus like, why should we do this? It's just going to kind of support your argument and in some ways answer your question, which makes sense. But, to do that without having the understanding of the bias or just using it to support your point, I think is sort of short-sighted. So all those things together, I think it just kind of becomes a question of like, what are we using here? It's like, we don't know where it's from. We don't know if it's credible. We don't know if it's ripped off from someone else, and we don't know if it's biased. Then like, I think if you were to take AI out of the equation, anyone would sort of laugh you out of the room if you came with something in hand that had those three criteria. So that would be my biggest concerns for content teams and things to be aware of.
For sure. The site sources thing makes me think. I know I posted an image in Slack the other day, but I was on the Y Combinator thread, and it was just kind of an eye-opening thing for someone who's like just starting to dig into like, well, how is AI? Like, how does this even work? Like, what's the functionality here? To see like, oh, these things have to return an answer. This is a language model and a predictor. Like, someone asked for some cited sources around a particular argument they were making, and it just invented them, including the URLs. Like, every part of it was made up, which is fascinating. But I thought it got it was pretty poignant. Like, okay, all of these things still need to be verified, and it may get better at doing this thing. Yeah. But right now it makes up a lot, including its cited sources. And then the other things I saw that I thought were fascinating, and I know we've talked about a lot, is like, how does Google kind of like respond to all of this AI content or sites that do it? And like, I think Ross Hudgens from him and his agency ran a test or looked at a test around AI content. It's roughly 3,500 pages published in a very short amount of time, a couple months. And you can see the initial traffic kind of shoot up, and then pretty immediately it's like Google caught on and it dwindles down. And then Mark Williams Cook published another thing, 10,000 pages generated by AI. Again, you saw kind of Google take it. It looks like it's ranking because it's getting clicks and the impressions shot up, and then pretty immediately it just dies.
Like literally went to zero, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And so in one of them, it didn't go all the way to zero. It seems like it kept some of the longer term, or not longer term, the longer phrases kind of easier to rank for / probably not a lot of competition. And so it was able to just hang out. But in Mark Williams Cook's example, it is almost zero. So I think that's something, especially for content teams or people in SEO and content, to consider. Like, there's also a part of this that we just don't know entirely what Google's response is going to be in terms of accepting this or an acceptable amount. It'll always probably be a little bit of a black box, but without more testing and time, it's really hard to say like how much anyone should lean on entirely AI produced content.
Right. And I think both of those examples show that even without any updates to the algorithm, they already are pretty good at detecting that, like that, because that, unless they've pushed some update that no one picked up on since then, like it's already kind of handled a few of those cases where it's a bit more egregious. And I think, there's a lot of talk too about like, it's all about human edited AI content, which I agree. I mean, I think that certainly changes it. But to your point, like you don't know what that line is. You don't know how heavily it needs to be edited, how much changes. We don't know what exactly is the pattern recognition that triggers it to like identify as AI content. And so I think there's already some things in place, and I think there will be more. And I think the companies that are going for it and really just like leaning heavily on it and ramping up volume and turning it out quickly, my expectation is that if it already doesn't get caught with what their systems are, then I certainly anticipate an algorithm update potentially within even 2023 that picks up on that a bit more and just hammers their performance. And at which point, what efficiency gains did you really have there? Yeah. I mean, hopefully you made a bunch of revenue, at least in the in those good times. Because, but yeah, I think there's a lot there, and I think it always, like, one of the best ways to be good at SEO is just constantly be reminding yourself that Google's number one objective is to surface the best result on every query. So like they want to understand the intent to make sure they get it right, but then also understanding your content, how it's engaged with, like, does it actually satisfy that? Because, one of their core objectives is that you're not having to search and research or like search and click through, a bunch of different results on that page to try to find what you're looking for. They want to show it to you as quickly as possible. So from that standpoint, I have a lot of questions about, something that's almost entirely AI generated without much human intervention. I have a lot of questions about how well that's actually going to satisfy that objective. Mm-hmm. And so when you're outside that line, then that's where I think you set yourself up to suffer more when there is an algorithm update.
For sure.
So, but I think there's a lot that like AI will, like the question of like, will it replace search engines or will it replace writers? Like, yeah, to some extent, I do think it will. I think there's nuance though. Like, I think that we talked about in the beginning when you kind of brought that up. Like, what's sort of like the even-tempered like approach to this? I think there's a ton of nuance in how it will be impacted. Even prior to the AI stuff, there's been a lot of fuss about like zero-click searches and how Google is taking away traffic and all this stuff. But like, yeah, look, my example that I give is like, I don't want to have to search what day, what's the, Thanksgiving date 2000 or 2023. I don't want to have to go click into a website to get that answer. Like it used to be. There's these, sites that made a ton of money on AdSense. Yes, Google knows that. Just show it to me and I don't have to click into a result. Like, that's great. That's a great example of like, it is taking traffic away from websites. And I think that's a positive thing. And so I think like certain types of queries will make a lot more sense to put into something like ChatGPT, especially when there's a mobile app. And, again, like the source of it will be a bit questionable for certain types of things, but I think there'll be some that are just very straightforward. And I think there are other types of content from a writer standpoint, like it's not going to outright eliminate an entire field, type of content creator or anything like that. But like, yeah, if your entire job is one of, 15 copywriters at a huge agency and all you do is write product descriptions for e-commerce clients, like I'd be a little worried, because there are, it may say, well, we think that AI can cause us to only need 7, and, something like that. So I don't think that it's like, that no one cares for the written word or, the ability to craft unique stories or anything like that. But like, there are certain things, and certainly in teams where there's larger numbers that I think it matters more. So those would be my thoughts is like, there are, but then going back to search and like the flip side of those like zero search queries, like there's still a lot of things that people will search to be able to read more in depth. They want to know who is the person behind it. Like, if I'm going to build a sales strategy for my company, I want to go read from Jason Lemkin and people that I know have done it in this type of industry, and they have credibility, and I want to learn from them. I don't want an auto-generated, lame answer from AI that's just super vanilla. And so I think, again, it's just sort of that nuance of like, you're going to have some cases where it doesn't affect it at all, and you're going to have some cases where it does affect it heavily for both how search engines work, how people use search engines, but also, writers as well.
Yeah,
and designers. I mean, I think we haven't talked about it as much yet, but like the AI image generation and some of that stuff, like I think there are certain types of content that will just make a lot more sense for AI to generate. And, if you're a designer whose sole purpose is doing that type, it may be more impactful than others.
For sure. For types of content, the one thing I think it does better, to your point, especially if I'm thinking of like ChatGPT specifically, or any, like I think Jasper has its own chat as well, and is like, if I want to be learning things with right and wrong answers, and I want a level of interactivity as I'm learning. So like, it might be me learning how to like, I might want it to spit out a type of HTML for a very specific thing, and it can like organize code, or it can organize a table for me. And it's almost like my search prompt becomes a way to get an answer, and then I can ask it to manipulate the certain things it gives me. I really like that interaction. I don't see that as something like Google's going to do. But yeah, like I think deep learning, deep expertise, creators, influencers, like the things that people develop loyalty to, it's not going away, and Google's still very much a way to serve that type of information.
Yeah. I totally agree. The thing that I found that I thought was just the absolute most stunning thing was, because when I think about the alternative of how I would try to go about it outside of AI, it's extremely difficult. And I think that there's some nuance to this example, in terms of like, some quantities and things may not be exactly right, but like if you ask, ChatGPT, give me a 3-day meal plan that has, whatever your macros you want, 30 grams of protein per day, and doesn't include, all the foods that you don't like, whatever, onions or, anything like that, or that you're allergic to. Like that alone, spitting that out, like to try to go search and find multiple meals throughout the day that add up to 30 grams of protein, extremely difficult. And then you have, on top of that, have to try to find recipes or things that don't include ingredients that you don't like or that you're allergic to. That much harder. Then you refine and say, put it in a table format, done. And then where it gets insane is that you say, now please convert this into a shopping list with quantities. And it will literally tell you 3, sweet potatoes and, all of this stuff. And like that, trying to do that on Pinterest or on Google, like unbelievable. Like that, that is a huge difference. I have not yet found the B2B, or marketing equivalent to anything that made me like so blown away by how powerful and time saving that is. So that's where I think there's just nuance and it will impact certain areas more than others for sure.
For sure. Okay, so I think we've remained pretty even keeled, probably even to slightly negative. So I think maybe to wrap it up, like let's just do kind of like what's a run through for you of like what is AI good at right now that excites you and is potential for content marketers.
Absolutely. Image generation, I think, is a big one. I mean, obviously, you look at like what Canva has done in enabling marketers, and realistically, most marketers are not good designers. They passable maybe, but
I feel seen. I feel a little.
No, it's true for many. It's definitely not a pointed comment, but it's just like with anything, it's when you have the ability to do it, but you're not a designer, you're going to do things. So I think there are certain things that if I can use AI to get 80% of the way there, and then it drops that into Canva or whatever, I could pull it into Canva and finish from there or whatever. But there are just a lot of things that marketers need, variants of an image to A/B test in ads, or a featured image on the blog for an early stage company that doesn't have a dedicated designer, just things like that. I think there's some really, really great stuff on the image generation front. I think workflow efficiency is a bigger part, like even just be able to like wrangle larger data sets or like manipulate stuff into tables, like I said, or generate some of the simpler things like title generation. Some of these smaller things I think are a really, really great way to sort of enhance the workflow. And I think the last thing I would say is like the idea generation. So like that's the really great thing, is just to be able to kind of like have it dump out some ideas, even if you throw away 90% of them, like to be able to then kind of like refine on the 10% you like and be able to expand on that. Like you can pretty quickly like keep refining and churning out more and more ideas on a lot of stuff that I think can kind of kind of point you in some unique directions that would otherwise maybe not go. So and again, and that to me, that's an example of like Googling for ideas is a very painful workflow. You're signing up to click through a lot of sites and scroll quickly and whatever. And so that's a great example of like, I don't need to do that. I can just, put in a search and then refine and refine and refine and, keep generating more ideas. So that would be 3 areas that I think are really interesting, specifically with marketing and even more specifically content marketing.
For sure.
What about you? Anything to add to that?
I mean, I would double down on idea generation, and then like very specifically, I think one of my Achilles heels has always been short form copy, because I practice long form all the time, and in some ways have probably just justified that, like, no, my like tone and character and whatever else is just being wordy. So then I've got to come up with like a podcast title, or a title tag or a meta description or whatever, a LinkedIn ad that has a 60 character limit or something, and immediately I'm just like writing the least creative thing I've ever produced. Like, it just feels like blanc, here's exactly what it is. But I'm always blown away by writers who have been able to, like, wow, that says everything in that amount. And so using some of these tools has been incredible, when I can write out my wordy version and say, can you summarize this in 60 characters? And it does. Yes. I still don't find myself using their exact phrasing, but I'm using quite a bit of it. Or like it produces maybe a tone or mood that I wanted and wasn't quite conveying, that I've been very impressed with.
Yep. Yeah, and it's I know. Yeah, I guess to end on something that dates me horribly, but the first agency I worked at was 2009, I think, and like I remember an entire week, I think we had a new client with like multiple, maybe 2,000, maybe 3,000 page website, and title tags and meta descriptions were still highly influential in how the page was optimized. And I literally the entire week was just in a spreadsheet writing new title tags and meta descriptions, one after another, after another, after another. Lunch break, come back, do it, and like, so yeah, and obviously, nuance there, because like that is, not as big of a factor now. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think people need to spend as much time crafting it, but, the amount of time difference there, I think is wild. And similar to what you shared, I also, struggle with being overly verbose, and I think that really does help when you can ask it to summarize something, and then you sort of see it as like, oh, okay, now I get it, and then you can kind of kind of go from there. So
for sure.
And I did want to add, for anyone who might still be listening, obviously near the end here, who also may be a parent with a kid in school who has to read books and do book reports. ChatGPT is fantastic for taking whatever their book is, and you can get whatever, main points for every chapter, or, who is the main character, what's the married struggle, like any of that stuff, you can just get it. You don't even have to open the book. You don't have to try to like challenge your kid to figure out if they're actually, getting that part right. So that's been pretty awesome. Shortcut as a parent too, to just like drop that in, spits it out in 2 seconds, and
I think you should. I think you should start a personal brand that is just ChatGPT for parenting.
Yeah. How to write book prompts for book report.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Well, I think it was a good conversation. I'm hopeful that we'll get past the hype cycle portion and all the people with making their cash grab for, selling lists of prompts and courses and all this stuff, and normalize into a better, more sober use of the tools, and refine from there. But I really enjoyed this conversation and everything we've covered today. Feel free to visit 10speed.io /podcast. We have a few seasons of content that we've done in the past. A lot of good stuff in there. on a variety of topics and with a number of guests as well. Be sure to subscribe, Apple, Spotify, whatever podcast platform you're on, subscribe. Podcasts will be coming, roughly weekly moving forward. So excited to have more of that coming out. And thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.